Hello YouTube. Today I will tell you about some very interesting, fascinating events that took place a long time ago in an empire far away, in the Russian Empire. And it has to do about UFO observations that took place, well, over 100 years ago. We'll look at the 19th century, and we'll start with a document that was found in the Russian State Historical Museum, which described a phenomenon observed in the sky over Moscow in 1808. The phenomenon executed movements over the city, and they resemble reports of UFO movements in other countries and in other centuries. Its physical characteristics, too, resemble descriptions of later UFOs cited elsewhere. This object was able to move through space in any direction. It achieved incredible speed and was able to stop immediately. The object emitted phosphoric illumination and also flared up very brightly. The drawing that accompanied the document indicates that the object stopped, flared up, and took off vertically in the area over the Vagankovsky Hill. That's between the Borovsky gates of the Kremlin and the Pashkov house. The sky was clear and starry on that memorable night on September 1st. It was at 8 p.m. when the phenomenon was observed. It could be seen quite clearly from the University of Moscow. The object was of awesome size. I'm quoting from the actual document. It also emitted strong, cracking sound. At the very end of its maneuvers, the object remained as a brightly lit disk. It ascended very smoothly upwards to the stars. It was still visible among them for a while, and then it disappeared. This document, according to a Russian writer Afanasyev, who published his report back in 1995 in a digest in Moscow, this document is authentic. The author discussed the document's authenticity very thoroughly, down to the characteristics of the paper and orthography. The document's author, in Afanasyev's opinion, was an educated person and probably a student or a professor of the University of Moscow. He also believes that the official censorship would not allow publication of the document for the fear that it might cause public indignation, and also due to the necessity to explain the phenomenon. Well, in 1805 in Moscow, a society was established. It was called the Muscovite Society of the Explorers of Nature. And it still exists, by the way, and if you are in Moscow, you can visit it. They also have, I believe, an English website. But anyway, some time ago, in the archives of this society, documents were found. They were handwritten protocols of the meetings of the time, of the 19th century. And in the digest for 1808, Russian researchers, I believe from the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper, they found a writing in French language about the... It said that on the 23rd of September, Mr. Chebotaryov made a presentation about the observation that he had conducted on the 1st of September of a meteor. Of course, this was no meteor, but at that time, meteors were, this is the name of meteor, was given to all objects which were flying through the sky, because at that time nobody said UFO. And later, the Russian researchers found out that the presenter was not very well versed in astronomy. They went ahead and they found out, and do more research, that among employees of the Moscow University in 1808, there was a gentleman by the last name Chebotaryov. He was a 24-year-old Andrei Haritonovich Chebotaryov, who was a Master's of Science of physical mathematical sciences. He was a senior professor of chemistry and technology. Now, the document itself, it was a part of the Pyotr Semyonovich Poludensky collection. Now, this gentleman was a senator in Russia, and he had held high Russian government positions. So, let's look at another interesting sighting from the 19th century Russia. The Tula city resident, city parliament or Duma member Andrei Afanasievich Kazachikhin wrote in his diary on February 24, 1875, that he saw a strange ball or sphere in the sky, which, rising very high, transformed with a bang into something white, looking like a snake with big round head and a long wriggling tail. These things were observed by a member of the city parliament for 10 minutes or more. Kazachikhin kept a diary, monument to past events. That's what he called it, for almost 32 years. And according to the rest of the records, he does not make the impression of a person who is capable of fantasizing anything. That's according to Russian historians. He wrote about everything, about the passage through Tula of members of the imperial family, tours of celebrities, elections to the parliament, the lodging of military units, and even deaths of his friends. And he wrote about the mysterious phenomenon, very ordinary, without attaching too much importance to it. Now, in 1892, there was a very curious incident that took place. There was a sighting of a highly strange flying object. It took place in March of 1892, and it was close to the town of Lutsk, over the Zmenets village in the Volyn province, Volynskaya gubernia. As the witnesses were Russian military personnel, an official investigation followed up. Sightings were therefore publicly confirmed. The craft flew faster than a bird. The flight altitude was compared to that of a crane flying in the sky. The craft emitted a certain noise. Peasants were able to hear it in their huts. The craft created an air current as it flew. An official military report presented in the Razvedchik magazine of the Russian Defense Department contained curious details. The craft flew very fast. Its color was bright and metallic. The commanding officer of the 33rd Regiment, who presented the report, did not see this craft, but recalled another sighting that he had personally observed in the same month. A comet-like object over the horizon. It had intermittent illumination and shone brightly from time to time. There was no wind whatsoever, and the moon seemed to emit a dull glow. The sighting created much discussion in that area. Other published descriptions of the March 1892 object mentioned loud noise like that of a moving train in the distance, a flying machine, its shape and size that of a haycock, something that emitted pillars of light at night. Some observers discerned moving parts and wing-like details. The shape was actually that of a dome, a common shape of modern UFOs. Other descriptions revealed that the craft moved violently, that it illuminated the surrounding area. Peasants mentioned that the shape was actually that of a box, and soldiers described it as a haycock. It was observed over several villages between the 22nd and 23rd of March. What was that mysterious flying machine? And I have to tell you that a lot of the research about the strange craft of the 19th and early 20th century over the Russian Empire, a lot of it was conducted by a brilliant Russian UFO researcher and author, Mikhail Gerstein. He's one of the most knowledgeable people in this world when it comes to UFOs. A scientist, very dedicated to his projects. Now, another interesting testimony comes from Russian military artillery officer Captain Unzhevsky of the 1st Artillery Brigade. I've got this information from the Секретные исследования or Secret Research newspaper in Belarus. It was published in the year of 2002. A very cool newspaper, by the way, and Philip Mantle and we've published our stuff there as well. This newspaper reprinted a letter of the captain, which was actually published in a Muscovite newspaper, Moskovsky Vedomosti, a long time ago. During the night of March 16, 1892, while a passenger was aboard a train traveling from Vyazma to Moscow, he observed aerial phenomena. It was a bright red dot high over the horizon. The captain and other passengers saw the outlines of a sphere. After 25 minutes of observation, they quite clearly observed violet light to the right of the object, and to the left they saw a bright red line of light. The sphere itself remained of the same red color. Some 15 minutes through the observation, the phenomenon moved up and down, vacillating 3 or 4 times. After 25 minutes, the sphere rapidly departed at great speed. The captain added in his letter that such phenomena have appeared over Russia's western borders on occasions. People talked about this phenomena, and he decided to write his letter to the newspaper. I also know that in 1892, and I mentioned it in my lectures, there was an actual meeting of the Russian Engineering Society dedicated to the strange observations of a very unusual aircraft over the empire. This was well before anything like that was done in the West. Now we have to move to the early 20th century. On August 1st, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. And after that, everything unusual in the sky was attributed to the Germans by default. Already on August 11, the commander of the Kazan military district, Major General Alexei Alexeyevich Mavrin, sent a telegram to the authorities of all the provinces. There are obviously aircraft in the district's area. I repeatedly noticed flights in the factory's area and even illuminated the city with a searchlight, those objects. Please take measures to detect airplanes. If possible, he ordered the troops to shoot at the aircraft. But the order did not prevent appearance of a UFO even over Kazan itself. A day later or so, on August 13, another airplane was seen flying over the city, quickly flying at a very insignificant altitude. On August 14, at about 11 o'clock in the evening, a group of workers led by technician Kasyanov saw a black cigar-shaped apparatus quickly and silently flying over the Malaya Kokshaga River. That night, Kazan observed a strange celestial phenomenon. A star that is not a star, an airplane that is not an airplane. Some kind of bright ring-like circle with 2 rays slowly passed through the horizon in the direction of the Arsky field to the mouth of the Kazanka River. On August 17, the son of a police commander saw a flying airplane in the middle of the Paratsky factory's area. The father, who arrived at the place, also saw the object. Russian policemen or gendarmes searched the factory, but they found nothing and nobody. Let's look at what happened actually 1 month before. On July 21, 1914, a strange telegram was sent to the city of Orenburg from the Ministry of War of the Russian Empire. It was addressed to Colonel Smirnov. And here's what it is. N1461, this document executed by Mavrin, confidentially. We inform you that in your district airplanes of unknown origin were found. They were repeatedly seen at night, people noticed their passage over the workshops of factories and villages. We recommend that you take urgent measures to detain the aviators as well as deliver the spotlights that they use without concealing or hiding. You can shoot only in case of emergency associated with a danger to life. It is also necessary to notify the population. And so when Smirnov gathered a detachment of dozens of the most vigilant and tough Cossacks, he set off for a steppe expedition, for a raid. A steppe is the open area, or it's like savanna in the United States. So where do such airplanes come from in our wilderness? Not even afraid of flying in the dark, and moreover with powerful searchlights. This is what the colonel thought. However, already in the village of Krasnenkoye, he had to think very carefully because they interrogated a peasant, Pyotr Anuchkin, and his 3 daughters, who saw in the backwash near the mill that they had a large fire-breathing watermelon that surprisingly rolled over the water surface, which made it covered with ice. This scared the eyewitnesses, and then there were sharp pieces of ice flying towards the shore, and surprisingly the snow started falling and would not melt. The eyewitnesses immediately decided to flee, to run away. But remember that the mill had a lot of grain and flour, so it was impossible to leave it. So the Anuchkin family settled down under a canopy, almost at the edge of the water, peering fearfully from the canopy. And at night the oddities continued. A dark sky suddenly lit up. Something dark flew by with a whistle, and a sphere puffed. The water around it boiled, rose up, and together with the sphere or the ball flew into the sky. Pyotr swore to Smirnov that as soon as this phenomenon occurred, the snow began to melt, and someone as strong as a bear came up to the canopy, and as if playing, heaped a bag of flour on his shoulder and ducked into the water, so that the mill wheel fell off the axle. The colonel could not stand it and asked that the eyewitness should not fill his head with stupid things. Anuchkin was offended, but the daughter stood up for him and asked the colonel to visit the site. While Smirnov was thinking, a messenger rushed to the site where he was, and Smirnov was given a compulsory paper, much more interesting than the telegram from before. According to our information, it said the document, in some parts of the empire, strange air vehicles fly by at night and even sit on the roofs of military supplies and ammunition depots. Such cases were tracked in the Perm, Kazan, and Vladimir provinces. With the help of spotlights, these machines inflict arson on farm buildings and maim livestock. But people do not suffer. Please proceed to catch these criminals and submit information about them to the military authorities. Smirnov immediately arrived at the mill and laughed, because of course he did not see any ball or sphere of fire. Smirnov ordered the Cossacks not to sleep, but to watch the sky. And he himself admired the bright constellations until midnight. And then suddenly they lit up, those spotlights. They did not stand still and moved over the steppe until they stopped 100 meters from the mill, and the colonel was waiting for what would happen next. Light circles drenched with heat, and they blinded the shocked Cossacks and slipped past them to the water. One small ball attacked the mill wheel, which immediately caught fire, and fire spread to the dry steppe vegetation, and the steppe burned. From black smoke, colored balls began to fly out. Smirnov and his Cossacks became scared. The horses were all wounded, and this whole nightmare lasted exactly an hour. Clouds gathered and the rain extinguished the steppe fire. The light did not obey the laws of optics. It, like an autumn leaf slowly circling, it fell down. That's how the light moved. Apparently this was what the Anuchkins mistook for snow, the colonel thought to himself. And in the morning, charred corpses of horses were discovered. Then Smirnov decided to figure it out and interviewed hundreds of witnesses. But after a couple of weeks, he died in the war. This was, of course, World War I. And history itself preserved his materials. And this is an example of the fact, as we say in Russian, that the manuscripts do not burn. And there are documents, a whole pile of documents that we have left by him. And Russian researchers also go through them. Very interesting. But let's look at 1915. In April of 1991, the Soviet Union still existed, and among its magazines of the period was one that was titled Soviet Soldier. Its April issue carried a very interesting article. It was written by somebody whose last name was Vlodovets, but he actually found this information in the extracts from the files of the Central State Military Historical Archives of the USSR. Imagine how much more information about UFOs can be found there, if there is access. One memorable sighting dates back to 1915. The author obviously read the documents from the archives. In the autumn of 1915, Russia was engaged in the bloody World War I. However, the sightings of strange craft actually took place in a faraway corner of Russia, away from the European battlefields, just like the ones that I told you about before in 1914. Europe was very far away. So it was over the mouth of the mighty Volga River that the observations of unknown blimps or dirigibles took place in September of that year. Reports came from villages and towns some 150 kilometers from each other. Here's what the local people saw and heard in the sky over the Kazan military district. An object similar to a dirigible or a blimp, a huge balloon with a motor roaring in the air and with spotlights shining down. Also reported were a cigar-shaped object with a fin that hovered over a village, and 6 humanoid shapes in a boat under the object's belly. As the governor of the city of Astrakhan reported to the garrison commander, unknown blimps appeared over the Kalmyk steppes west of the Caspian Sea. Yet the Kalmyk prince Isiren Badmaev saw something else. His sighting is dated September 26, 1915, and it was on a Saturday. He observed a puff of black smoke appear from behind a hill. The puff of smoke instantly took off and split into 2 parts. One of them moved southward, and the other headed westward. Both parts had an elongated shape. It resembled a gray-colored boat. The prince watched these boats for 3 or 4 minutes. Their shape was initially spherical, and then in the blink of an eye the object assumed elongated shapes. Their altitude was considerably high above the horizon. The sky was cloudless. Prince Badmaev did see another boat about 40 minutes later. Here's what else is striking about his report. The vehicle in which he was traveling at the time of the sighting stood still each time he saw a boat in the sky. Kind of reminds you what happens with some of the vehicles in the 20th century when UFOs were observed. And I'm sure in the 21st as well. The impact on the machines and engines and so forth. Now, similar reports at the time came from as far away a town lying over 800 kilometers north from Astrakhan. One report dated October 9 from the village of Baranovka mentioned a landing in the forest. There were also reports from the Urals, a part of Russia where anomalous phenomenon dates back for centuries, and there is quite a lot of phenomena. You can see it in my videos, and I hope to tell you more about the Urals, which I have studied for many years. A search and capture expedition consisting of an officer, soldiers, policemen, and several civilians was sent to investigate, but its mission failed to produce results. Because the unknown aircraft appeared to be harmless, General Sandetsky, commander of the Kazan military district at the time, did not pay much attention to the reports. He did inform the Supreme Command General Headquarters and the Russian General Staff, but received no response, and the documents were shelved in the archives for future reference. At the time of the sightings, Zeppelins were able to fly 800 kilometers, but what nation would send them to the Russian Steppes district, very far away from Western Europe? What purpose would such a mission serve? Why go to the God-forsaken places, away from the main battlefields? All attempts to bring down aircraft were unsuccessful. On August 15, 2014, police fired on a so-called airplane flying at a low altitude above Yekaterinoslav, which is today is known as Dnepropetrovsk. By order of the commandant of the city, 25 policemen or gendarmes fired 2 volleys at the apparatus, after which the apparatus soared and disappeared. On September 22nd, at the Razdelnaya station of the Southern Railway, an airplane appeared with 2 white lights, made a circle above the station, and during the salvo of the guard company, the latter was illuminated by the spotlight from the airplane. After several volleys from the airplane, and later it went to Veselykut station. There was a clerk from the Volest, a local peasant self-administrative unit, who shot 3 times at the clearly visible pilots of the airplane. He didn't do any harm to them. And so this is another page from fascinating history of UFOs over the country where I was born. At the time it was known as the Russian Empire of the events. I was born in the USSR. Not that far away, but it's a fascinating history, and I'll try to bring you more about UFOs, strange objects observed over Russia for millennia, and about other phenomena. I wish you all a happy New Year. I hope to produce more videos. I do appreciate your support, and if you can, please support me. You can find the links in the description of my videos, and I hope to meet with you soon. Thank you.